I would like to start out with a story from my youth in fascist Germany about a Jewish woman on the way to the concentration camp. The story shows the martyrdom which counter-revolutionary, exclusive, authoritarian populism or fascism can mean for Jews, Christians, socialists, and communists and other victims. Then I would like to discuss shortly the possible causes of anti-Semitism, Moses and Jesus as religious revolutionaries and martyrs of freedom. The encounter with the friendly Jewish lady happened in Frankfurt, which had a large Jewish community in March 1941, almost 3 years after the Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, or the November pogrom from November 9 to 10, 1938. It was carried out by exclusive right-wing authoritarian populist paramilitary SA forces and masses of civilians throughout Germany in the framework of fascist identity philosophy of life and ideology and politics, while the German authorities looked on without intervening and even sympathetically. Ideology understood here critically as false consciousness, masking of particular economic and political interests, shortly the untruth. I have to shorten all this now. I'm talking about the actuality of this story in terms of right-wing happenings here in Michigan, attacks at the governors, and of course, January 6th. And also in terms of happenings at that time. So the Kristallnacht, all this, I suppose that it is very well known. And also in terms of an experiment which Hitler made when he sent a ship with 800 Jewish people to North America in order to prove that nobody wanted to have the Jews. And in reality, in Cuba and in New York, the ship was rejected, and the captain was supposed to take the Jews home to Germany again. He won the ship against the rocks in England, and so all the Jews were rescued, but then they were put into internment camps, and then they were delivered back to Belgium and Holland. And when the Germans marched into those countries, they were then put into concentration camps. So all this is somewhat connected to the story, but I cannot go into it in detail. The whole story happened in Frankfurt on my way one morning to my high school, the so-called Lessing Gymnasium, Lessing, a great German enlightener. And I had an accident with my bicycle. I had to push it. And there I met this lady with her big suitcases, and I carried them down to the Lessing Gymnasium, to the air shelter, where all the Jews of Frankfurt, or many of them, were collected in order to be brought to the east into the concentration camps. And there we passed by, when I carried her suitcases down, we passed by to the IG Farben building, in which the Cyclone B was prepared for the gassing operations, which started with in the middle of the war, when Germany entered the war with the United States, and the whole thing became a real world war. I want to go right into the middle of the story, since my time is very limited. And when the Jewish lady and I arrived at the entrance of the air shelter of the so-called Lessing Gymnasium with my bicycle and her suitcases on it, we heard from below the voices of many people, Jews from all over Frankfurt. Soon a young SS-man from the Schutzstaffel, a major paramilitary organization under Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, and Heinrich Himmler came running up the staircase from the air shelter basement below. The SS was recruited from the German bourgeoisie. Its members had often the same classical humanistic education which I received in the Lessing Gymnasium. After a bloody Jewish pogrom initiated by the SS, for instance, in Warsaw or elsewhere, they could easily play on the next leftover piano, Beethoven's or Mozart's bourgeois revolutionary symphonies in the midst of the ruins they themselves had created. The competing opposite of the SS was the SA, the Sturmabteilung or assault division by named stormtroopers or brown shirts, part of the Nazi Party, also a paramilitary organization. Their methods of violent intimidation played a large role in Adolf Hitler's rise to power. The SA was recruited from the German proletariat and was much less educated. Not the SA, but part of the SS, besides the SS elite tank divisions, was in charge of the concentration camps, first as labor and finally as death camps. I again have to jump over. As a matter of fact, the SS-man was so shocked by what he saw that he could not speak for some time. Then he composed himself and started to shout with his loudest commando voice so that all the teachers and students in the classrooms of the Lessing Gymnasium could clearly hear him. How can you, as an Aryan boy, carry the suitcases of a Jewish pig? It is a scandal. I answered him that the old Jewish woman did not look like a pig, but rather like my grandmother. That response made the SS-man even angrier, as if he suspected that I had a Jewish grandmother. But that was not the case. My father, Bruno Siebert, bourgeois family tree was totally Aryan down to the 16th century. Admittedly, my mother and her brother looked Jewish and were often suspected of being Jewish. Adolf, working in the Dresdner Bank in Frankfurt throughout his life, became a member of the NSDAP and so on. We finally then, after this much shouting, we went over to the director of the gymnasium. In his anger, the SS-man took me and my bicycle to the director of the Lessing Gymnasium, Dr. Silomon, who was one of the so-called noble Nazis who had written a book on the Indo-Germanic language community. The SS-man shouted at him as well, "What kind of students do you educate here? They help Jewish pigs carrying their suitcases. It is a shame." The SS-man demanded that I had to be punished for my treacherous non-German deed. Dr. Silomon remained silent. He just looked at me sadly as if he wanted to say, "Why did you have to do this to us?" I must admit to the honor of the Lessing Gymnasium that I was never punished for my helping the Jewish lady. 4 years later, after the end of the war, I witnessed to that in my teachers' denazification procedures in their favor, and they were grateful for this. 2 years earlier, in 1941, after the SS-man had been done with his shouting at the Jewish lady and me and even Dr. Silomon, I was allowed to return belatedly to my classroom. When I walked through the halls of the Lessing Gymnasium, which 4 years later would be bombed out by the Allied bombers, While the nearby IG Farm administration building was saved, I passed by a classroom in which a Catholic priest called lovingly Frog by the students taught in Hebrew from the book of Exodus of the Hebrew Bible about the Mosaic 10 Commandments, while all of them were violated against the Jews down in the air shelter basement, including the friendly and frightened Jewish lady from Frankfurt, whose nation had once produced them, the second and third commandment, anticipating the image and nameless prohibition of Immanuel Kant, the greatest bourgeois enlightener, a colleague of Lessing. The priest could teach religion in a public school in Nazi Germany, which is not possible here now, on the basis of the Empire Concorded concluded between Adolf Hitler and the Vatican, which treaty is still valid today in 2021 in the German Federal Republic. On the second floor of the Lessing Gymnasium, I passed by a classroom in which a teacher taught in Greek about the dialogues of Socrates, as reported by Plato, and all what they had to say about truth and justice, while the greatest untruth and injustice was committed against the Jews down in the air shelter basement, including the friendly Jewish lady from Frankfurt. When I finally arrived at my own classroom and sat down in my seat, I found Dr. Schumann teaching in Latin out of Ovid, Publius Ovidius Naso, a Roman poet from the reign of Emperor Augustus and from the time of Jesus of Nazareth. Ovid was noted especially for his Amatoria and Metamorphoses. Dr. Schumann belonged to the Swiss theologian Karl Barth's movement of confessing church, which opposed and resisted the fascist exclusive identity ideology and politics and anti-Semitism, and the Lutheran Empire Bishop Müller community of German Christians who followed and supported Adolf Hitler. The Calvinistic dialectical theologian Barth thought that the great philosopher and theologian Hegel should become, he is standing beside me here behind me, that Thomas of Aquinas of the modern Protestants, and maybe also of the modern Catholics, so that both may be rescued from the secular bourgeois Marxian and Freudian enlightenment, emphasizing mimesis rather than cult, as also did the theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer in his Religionless Christianity, and paid for this witness with his martyrdom, martyr death, through being nakedly hanged in the concentration camp of Flossenburg in Bavaria in 1945, in the last moments of World War II. Barth and Bonhoeffer applied radically Jesus' teachings against their pagan, idolatrous fascists who, besides being God-gläubig or God-believing and talking about the Almighty, the Lord, the Providence, were also petit bourgeois authoritarian enlighteners, as such denying the fear of God, as the German tribesmen had once denied the fear of the gods at the time of Tacitus, as well as miracles, angels, and Satan, and believed that man was good by nature and that there were no sins or guilt, but at best only mistakes, and that love should always be without pain. Most Nazi leaders never felt guilty about or repented what was done to the Jews in the air shelter of the Lessing Gymnasium in 1941, and to the friendly Jewish woman among them, and to all the other Jewish victims. They only regretted that they had not murdered more, or all of them. Many other Germans thought the same. When after the war, one of my cousins participated as judge in the Auschwitz trial in Frankfurt, he got white hairs in a short time, not only because of the terrible crimes he heard about, but also because of the pressure from the population that he should not stand against and judge his own German countrymen who had only done their duty for the fatherland in great danger. Already before the war, some fascists had tried to revert back behind the Abrahamic religions to the Trinitarian Gothic religion of blood and soil and the beliefs in Thor, Wotan, Odin, Freya, and Valhalla. The unconfessing Christian and humanist Dr. Schumann compared the present fascist age with the late Roman Empire and its dramatic decline into barbarism. He liked to present to his class the Latin church songs of the Catholic Middle Ages. He was very ecumenical. Dr. Schumann did not shy away from criticizing bravely the fascist news of the last night when he came into the classroom in the morning. His fearless standard statement after a short news analysis was always, "They have bloodily, awfully, lousily cheated us again." Dr. Schumann made skeptical and cynical remarks and jokes after mentally and intellectually somewhat limited Nazi leaders had addressed the faculty and student body over the radio. For instance, Dr. Lai, the often drunk Minister of Labor in the fascist empire. As Dr. Schumann was teaching in class, he always used to walk up and down the room, continually holding the handkerchief to his nose. This morning, after he had heard the SS men shouting at the Jewish lady and me, and even at Director Silomon through the open windows some time before, he came to my seat and bent down and looked at me through his very thick glasses. And he was not angry at all because of my being late, but there was a great smile in his eyes, which seemed to say that he was proud of me and the help I had given to the Jewish lady. After the SS men shouting my status as a token proletariat was greatly lifted among students and faculty, and soon afterwards I was elevated to the leader and speaker of the class, which I remained through the years and decades to come. Now again, I have to jump over a lot of stories which are connected. And I want to come to the second part. I had many discussions with rabbis through the years about the causes of anti-Semitism. They told me it was a mystery. I personally thought that perhaps the ethical monotheism of Abraham and finally of Moses, the revolutionary, and his suffering and martyrdom had something to do with anti-Semitism, or more specifically anti-Judaism, in the dialectic of the history of nations and of religions, particularly the principle of equality. When the Israelites, on the basis of their radical monotheism, told other nations around them that their gods, the highest in their lives, were mere idols who had eyes and could not see, and had ears and could not hear, and had legs and could not walk, and that not they were eating the sacrifices, but rather the priests, and rejected their cultic rules and ethics, then this genuine enlightenment did certainly not make them any friends, but rather provoked hate, anger, and aggression. Moses did not only oppose the gods of the Egyptians, like Pharaoh and Akhenaton had done when he introduced his kind of monotheism and thereby lost the loyalty of his people. Moses, beyond his ethical monotheism, killed a slaveholder supervisor. He had to flee Egypt. He went into exile. Later on, he returned to Egypt and liberated the Hebrew slaves in the name of the God Yahweh through attacking the Pharaoh and the Egyptian slaveholder class. He did not overthrow the ruling slaveholder class as a revolutionary would usually do, like Spartacus tried to do, but he did free the Hebrew slaves 500 years before Cyrus the Great of Persia The Zoroastrian outlawed slavery on his Civil Rights Manifesto in the name of his god Ahura Mazda, or simply Mazda, the first person in the Zoroastrian Trinity, followed by Mithras and Ahriman. Moses was a revolutionary in the sense that he founded a new state on the basis of a covenant with Yahweh and of 10 commandments by him. Moses was a martyr of freedom, not only in the sense that he suffered from the Egyptian slaveholders, but also from his own people, which fell back into polytheism, making for themselves the Egyptian fertility god, the golden calf, while he was talking with Yahweh on Mount Sinai. Moses' brother Aaron even joined the regressive, rebellious masses. They were angry against Moses because he led them instead of into the Holy Land with milk and honey, into the desert without bread and water. They longed to return into slavery, where they had at least enough to eat and drink. Moses and Aaron were even punished by their God Yahweh because they lost momentarily faith in him. They had to die before the people reached the Holy Land. In the 20th century, Jews, Christians, and socialists and communists were murdered because of their Mosaic principle of equality, by exclusive right-wing authoritarian populists, by fascists who follow their ethics of aristocratic principle of nature, of the inequality of races, nations, gender, and classes. In the Project Barbarossa, alone 6 million Jews and 26 million so-called communists were murdered by 4 million baptized Europeans invading and occupying the Soviet Union. Also, Rabbi Jesus could be called a martyrized revolutionary, like Moses, in spite of the fact that also he did not violently overthrow a ruling class, be it slaveholders, feudal lords, or capitalists. Jesus, as a good Jew, celebrated the Pascha meal, in which the Jewish people remembered every year on Easter their liberation from Egyptian slavery through Moses in the name of Yahweh. Rabbi Jesus followed Moses' law, the 10 commandments, but Jesus was also critical of Moses because he allowed divorce against the original will of Yahweh, yielding to the Jews' hardness of the heart or inability to learn. Jesus replaced Moses' old covenant by his own new covenant during his last Pascha meal in Jerusalem. In the year 30, Jesus initiated the dialectical transition from Judaism to Christianity, the determinate negation of the Mosaic law, its critique, and its preservation. Jesus stated, "Do not imagine that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to complete them. For I tell you, if your virtue goes no deeper than that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven. You have learned how it was said to our ancestors, you must not kill, and if anyone does kill, he must answer for it before the court. But I say this to you, anyone who is angry with his brother will answer for it before the court." And there is a difference between Moses and Jesus, a revolutionary radicalization. In the name of this difference, Jesus provoked the Jewish and the Roman ruling class. The tensions grew toward Easter 30. Jesus told his opponents that they were not the sons of Abraham, but rather the sons of Satan, because they wanted to kill him. He finally marched with his friends and followers up to Jerusalem and the temple, which Cyrus the Persian had rebuilt 500 years earlier. But the ruling classes in Jerusalem and Palestine did not accept him and his movement and his kingdom of heaven, his truth. During his Last Supper, he was betrayed to the priests by Judas Iscariot, the man from Kariot, a suburb of Jerusalem. Jesus knew that the revolution was lost. He was arrested on Mount Olive, sentenced in the Sanhedrin on the charge of blasphemy, and by the Roman governor, the mass murderer Pontius Pilate, on the charge of high treason, and was tortured and crucified on Calvary. But his friends announced his resurrection and ascension, that the murderers had not triumphed over the innocent victim. Jesus' revolution of painful sacrificial love was remembered, and innumerable revolutionary martyrs followed him under slaveholder, feudal, and capitalistic systems, even into the 20th and 21st centuries. Thus, Archbishop Romero and his liberation theologians carried the Jesus revolution into Nicaragua and tried to bring justice and equality to the coffee plantation workers and their families, and were killed by the fascist arena party and government, defending the right of native and foreign capitalists to privately appropriate the collective surplus labor. Romero, the liberation theologians, and 70,000 basic Christian community members were murdered, martyrized revolutionaries. Romero was canonized by Pope Francis and the Church, and all the other martyrs who died with him were saints like him as well. The revolution and the martyrdom of freedom and justice and equality and brotherhood and sisterhood continues today on all continents. Thank you.